Long story short, about 6 or 7 months later, they were performing in front of about 100 people. And they were revealing a lot of deep truth about limitations in the mental health organizations, in the mental health industry, about how sometimes the quick fix, like the medications, were making them sick. One lady was talking about how her medication was making her spitting up blood, but the doctor didn't want to hear that. They also talked a lot about how their sessions were so short, 5 to 10 minutes, and the doctor would keep looking at the clock and not really present, not really there or listening. So for an industry that's supposed to be dedicated to healing, I think we rattled a few cages by exposing a lot of that truth. And at the end of that presentation, the group had doubled. Another 10, 15 people wanted to be a part of this. It was a very powerful experience, and it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. And that would never have happened if I weren't able to tell that vulnerable story. So that is my vulnerable story, and that is the third technique on engaging. So quick recap for the 3 techniques is make your point. That's letter A. Letter B is encourage interactivity. And C is tell a vulnerable story. Now, before I go on, I'm about 35 minutes in now. Before I go on, I do want to acknowledge somebody. A lot of this presentation is based on a presentation by Michael Losier, Losier, Michael Losier. He wrote a book called Law of Attraction, and that's not to be confused with the Abraham Hicks Law of Attraction book. So I came in contact with a lot of this material about NLP and creating your own classes and that kind of a thing through his. So those of you who may have heard this content before, you know that I'm kind of making this my own material in a lot of ways in helping to understand functional and dysfunctional relationships. But I want to make sure that I quote the source, and I meant to do that at the beginning of this presentation, but thought I'd put it in now. Okay, so we're going on to number 4, and number 4 is create functional relationships out of dysfunctional relationships. Okay, so again, create functional relationships out of dysfunctional relationships. Now, a lot of my friends and a lot of the people I'm working with now are dealing with a lot of issues with organized gang stalking, a lot of intimidation. A lot of contriving of poverty is done through this kind of bullying, this kind of gang stalking. So I want to address that in this section, and I want to address how you can kind of interrupt the conversations by understanding yourself and understanding the emotions and how the emotions work. And we're going to do that by creating a matrix. So you're going to take that piece of paper, and the first thing I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you draw 3 vertical lines down, so that you're going to divide that into 4 sections, 4 vertical sections. And then when you're done that, you're going to draw 1, 2, 3. So we did 3 down, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 lines across. 4 lines across, so that you're making a grid of about 20 different blocks. Well, not about, it's going to be 20 different blocks, so that you have 4 vertical columns, and then you have 5 horizontal columns. And I'll put that in the B-roll here for the matrix that I had made before this conversation. Okay, so feel free to pause this recording so that you can make your own matrix. All right. So the first thing you're going to do is across the top row there, the top left, you're going to write in the word fire. Going across the top, the next one to the right is air, then water, and then earth. Okay, so those are the 4 elements, and we've talked about this in the most meaningful conversation. So fire, air, water, and earth. So a quick recap from that course. Fire is about creativity. It's symbolic of coming up with an idea and nurturing an idea, fanning the flame of an idea. So it's about having the space you need to kind of ignite an idea. And in the very beginning, especially we cover this in the 21st Century Hero's Journey, when you're coming up with an idea, something that's going to change everything, it's very critical that you find support for yourself in those first couple days, in those first couple weeks when the idea is still just just kind of like a little flame. To light the place on fire, that flame is going to need a lot of air, a lot of nurturing. So we go into air. Air represents the mind. It represents both the critical and the creative minds. And in a dysfunctional relationship, they work against each other and they cancel each other out. And the result is, usually there's not much forward movement. But when you learn to use them together in concert, the flame grows. The flame grows. And then we go into water. Water is representational of the emotions. So in the Most Meaningful Conversation, we talked about how to identify an emotion, and then once you identify it, how to calibrate it up so that you're experiencing more empowering emotions. And you can do this starting with any kind of disempowering emotion and then just work your way up. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then finally, earth is taking all of this, the creativity, the focus of the creativity of the fire, the focus of the air, and then the emotional energy of the water, and then creating something in time and space to move you forward towards the big goals, how to chunk it down one step at a time. Okay, so in a dysfunctional relationship, all of these elements, all of these learning styles are dedicated towards taking away a sense of self. And the worldview is the world is dying and there's nothing you can do about it, so I'm going to drag you down with me. That's the subliminal messages of a dysfunctional relationship. The functional relationship acknowledges that we're all in this together. And the quality of our life is the quality of our communications. I'm quoting Tony Robbins there. And that the more we work in equal partnerships, the more we can create more empowering situations to solve the problems of the disempowering situations. So what we're looking at now are literally the building blocks of how to create functional relationships out of what is dysfunctional by helping to understand the worldview and change the worldview. So we're going to go down the first column under fire here. So fire, and this is my version of this, I think of fire, I think of the visual learning style. So, especially with creativity, artists like to draw something, they like to sculpt something, they like to make something, and it creates an image. Okay, so the fire itself is really an image, the energy that we see, the moving flame, it's an image. So I equate that with the visual learning style. So next block down is where I identify the control drama. So the control drama of a dysfunctional relationship for the fire visual section is the intimidator. So the intimidator will use symbolism a lot of times to intimidate you. Sometimes they'll use language as well to paint a picture of what could happen to you if you fail. You might end up in jail. You might end up dead. They'll create all this imagery to intimidate you. Or they might use physical intimidation. They might come at you with something. They might show up. They might be right outside your door or something like that. So these are all intimidating tactics to turn the visual learning style against you. But with every control drama, there is a reversal. And it's something I call a coaching competency. The powerful observation, and this comes underneath the block under intimidator, powerful observation, where you know yourself well enough that you can observe, what you're doing in the present and what you've done in the past to continue to empower you. For instance, a disempowering visual for me is me lying on my couch, doing nothing and just watching TV. And somebody who would want to exploit that would say, you didn't do anything last night. You just sat in front of your TV and, you're a bum. You're doing nothing. A powerful observation for me is looking at my camera, looking at my lights here, looking at my microphone, saying, look, I'm presenting something that's really going to empower people. And even though there's not anyone right in front of me right now, this is pretty empowering. And just having the equipment set up and watching myself, outside of my own mind's eye, setting all of this up was very empowering for me. So the powerful observation, compliments, honest compliments of other people are all powerful observations. So there's a technique that we use to help develop that skill, and it's called the repetition. We've done this in the 21st Century Hero's Journey. We've done this in the Most Meaningful Conversation. Basically, it's just starting every sentence with an empowering statement, and you get to finish the sentence, like, in my world. So there's another version of this that goes, if I ruled the world. So the idea is to just set your clock, go for about 2 or 3 minutes without stopping, and just come up with as many powerful observations as you can. In my world, everybody has something of value to teach. In my world, people will take the initiative to introduce what it is they have to teach. In my world, an education market economy ends war. In my world, war becomes obsolete. In my world, people understand what functional relationships are and the power they bring. So anyway, this is just an example. We go into this more in depth with the other material. Okay, so we just went down the entire left column of our matrix. Now we're going to go to the next one to the right under air. Air, I think of the auditory learning style. So these are the people who will use a lot of language to make a point. For instance, in the visual style, people will ask, is that clear? Can you visualize that? Do you see what I mean? Auditories are like, do you hear me? Does this resonate? How does that sound to you? So these are all kind of NLP tactics, neuro-linguistic programming techniques, to help appeal to the learning style. So the auditory will use, a lot of like podcasting, stuff like this. They are the ones, who are very sensitive to sound. They make, very good musicians, and they know how to use the subtleties of music as well to convey messages. So the control drama, and this is underneath the auditory, the control drama is the interrogator. So the interrogator will use psychology a lot. They'll use language. They are the ones that are really use gaslighting a lot to allow you to question your own reality, so that you take on more of their worldview. They do this through language. But the reversal is the powerful question, and that's the block underneath the interrogator, is the powerful question. And this is one of my favorite things. I'm a big proponent of asking the big questions, the deep questions, and it really does reverse a lot of the damaging effects that people can do psychologically through language, through words. As a matter of fact, I just learned this recently. Sword. An anagram for sword is words. So people use the sword of the words, to cut your, in a lot of ways, to cut your sense of self. But you can always interrupt that with a powerful question. Someone will say, you're trying to make this podcast, to help empower people. What makes you think you can do that? You have never succeeded in anything like that before. Well, my powerful question would be like, well, why are you discouraging me? What is it that, if we're going to have a meaningful dialogue, a productive dialogue here, why would you discourage someone who's trying to empower someone else? What is your motivation with that? Is this coming from a sense of your own sense of failure? Well, let's explore that. What happened? Why, what was that moment where you failed, where you had this worldview where you're discouraging people? So normally when you come at somebody like that, they'll probably go away, or they'll get escalated. And if they get escalated, then you understand that you're standing your ground, and you'll have not as much to fear, especially when we go through the water aspect of this grid as well. So the technique is the question circle, and we'll do that in the Most Meaningful Conversation. And all that is just creating the safe space and giving everybody the space to explore your thoughts, and then asking the deeper questions that lead you back, to the worldview that everybody has a purpose. And if we are kind to each other, if we are compassionate towards each other, we can find the intersections and change the entire worldview. So now we're going to go down water. So the next one to the right is water. And the learning style that I equate with that is the kinesthetic, the ones that are really in tune with the body and the emotions. I think I probably said this in the most meaningful conversation, but what is an emotion other than the feeling you get in the body when you're considering something, or when an event has happened? I mean, think about it. Have you ever felt a broken heart? Have you ever felt a mind-blowing, in the head, a mind-blowing experience? Have you ever felt all choked up? Do you have butterflies in your stomach? So all of these things are very kinesthetic descriptions. So the kinesthetic communicator will ask, how does that feel? Let's touch base about that. So those kinds of questions will really resonate, communicate with a kinesthetic. So the control drama here is victimization. There's a great book called The Celestine Prophecy where the author James Redfield goes into a lot of these control dramas as well. He calls it the poor me syndrome, where you're really intimidating yourself. So if you look at all the control dramas, the intimidator back in the fire section will create, a victim, someone who self-victimizes, the poor me, that we find in the water section. Now, these are people who will isolate themselves to the point where they beat themselves up enough that they want others to feel their pain. And they know how to weaponize this. So rather than come out and say, I'm going to get you, I'm going to beat you up and all of that, they'll come at you and say, you hurt me so bad, I'm going to beat myself up and it's your fault. So, it's these kind of techniques that can be weaponized as a control drama. But the reversal of that is being able to stop and giving yourself some room. We call this tuning in, and that's going to be in the next block down. Tune in. So you really tune in, and identify what is the disempowering emotion that I'm feeling here that I'm starting to weaponize. And then the technique on crawling out of that is called the emotional hierarchy. Again, all of these reversal techniques that are at the bottom of your grid, they're all covered in the most meaningful conversation. So the emotional hierarchy is the act of being able to identify which emotion you're truly feeling on a 17 emotion spectrum, and then using the repetition technique to just take one emotion up. So for instance, if you're feeling, a lot of grief, you're not going to feel joy right away, with a snap of a finger. That's spiritual bypassing when you do that, and the mind rejects it and it resents you eventually for trying to trick it. Now, there's a lot of spiritual techniques and a lot of other coping mechanisms or medicines that might change your state right away, but they're quick fixes. They're not lasting, and they do more damage in the long run. So for instance, if you're feeling a lot of grief, the emotional hierarchy helps you to be with that grief, and instead of trying to jump up into joy, jump up into the next, the next one, which is maybe apathy, and the next one is fear. Fear is not a great feeling, is not a great emotion, but at least it's one step up from apathy and grief. And then you go up from there to desire, greed, anger, pride, and all the way up there. But it's like a muscle. You're training it. This is not quick fix type of stuff. This is training, So you get stronger by lifting every day or lifting every other day, not just once, for the quick fix. So then we go to the final column under Earth. And the learning style that I equate with Earth is the auditory digital, where you start to make things. You can make things with your hands, like we're doing with this grid, like we're doing with the clock model, like we're doing with a video. So you start to make things. And that's where actionable intelligence truly comes in. It's the emergence of the fire, air, water, and earth into creating something in time and space. So the control drama that I equate with this is the avoidance. The people who try to take away your sense of self, in a way they've won if you become aloof and you shut yourself off from the world and you don't do anything. So it's not quite as intense as the victimization, but you do tend to withdraw from the world and become less productive. Just like I said earlier, the intimidator creates victims and victims create intimidators. In a lot of ways, interrogators create people who are aloof or who avoid, just as the people who avoid can create interrogators as well. So the reversal of this is the powerful request. You challenge yourself to just accomplish a small goal, even if it's in the next hour, in the next day. Yes, making the big year-long goals or making the big, commitment to something is great, but those big commitments do not come to fruition without the small, powerful requests that you make of yourself on a day-to-day basis or on even an hour-to-hour basis. So the technique we use for that is the clock model. So in the most meaningful conversation, we went over the 12-day clock model. At the beginning of this conversation, we went over the 1 hour clock model. And now we're going to go into the final section of this presentation, which is the 1 year clock model. So, please take a moment to look over your matrix, make sure it makes sense. Please feel free to email me any questions if there's something about that doesn't quite make sense. But you should have 20 blocks there. And each of those blocks will have, on the top row, it'll have an element that represents an aspect of self, which is the fire, air, water, and the earth. The second row will represent the 4 basic learning styles: visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and auditory digital. The third row will represent the control dramas that people use to take away your sense of self, to steal energy from you, and that's the intimidator, the interrogator, the victim, and the avoider. The fourth row is the coaching competencies that help to reverse those control dramas that make dysfunctional relationships into functional relationships. And those are powerful observation, powerful question, tuning in, and making a powerful request of yourself. And then the final row at the very bottom are the techniques that we offer in the most meaningful conversation to develop the skill set to turn those dysfunctional relationships into functional relationships, which is the repetition, the question circle, the emotional hierarchy, and the clock model. So go ahead and pause for a moment, and then we'll go into the final section of this performance, this presentation. Okay, so number 5. We've come full circle, literally. So number 1 was visualize the 1 hour clock model. Number 5 is going to be visualize the 1 year clock model. All right, so write that down into number 5. Visualize the 1 year clock model. So you're going to do the same thing that you did at the top of this presentation, and that is you're going to draw a circle on your notepad, divide it in half from top to bottom so that the circle is divided in half. And then from left to right, make a horizontal line to divide your circle into 4 equal parts. And then each of those 4 equal parts will be divided into 3 equal parts so that you have a clock with 12 arms, with 12 sections. And then you're going to number it 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And you're going to make a goal for the next month, then the next 2 months, and then maybe the next 3 months. Okay, we're not going to do any more than that because the story will reveal itself as you go. And then you're going to make a 1 year goal, and you're going to fill in the story as you go. So the 1 year goal is going to be at the top at the number 12 spot. So this really ties in the 21st century hero's journey with this work as well. As you're going through this first month, notice the qualities that the first part of the hero's journey might come into play with your own life in the next month. Number 1 we cover is the origins or the call to adventure, where you're starting something new. When you go into the second month, expect maybe a little bit of conflict. The shadow comes up, you might be tempted to refuse the call at that point. Everything is, fun and easy at first, but then when you hit your first roadblock, you come up against that shadow. The third month, you might start to find more friends, more resources, more aid to help you along the line of what it is that you're trying to accomplish in that year. The fourth month might be like your deserts, where you're really working hard. You're not seeing a lot of progress, but you're developing a lot of skill. So anyway, please feel free to listen to the 21st Century Heroes Journey to understand all 9 of those. And then when you come to the 9 spot, you might find that you're starting to achieve your goal. And you might start to create a new goal as you're achieving that goal when you get to the 10 o'clock, the 11 o'clock, and the 12 o'clock spot. This is what I think of as the number 9, the destiny of our 21st Century Heroes Journey, where you have achieved the ultimate boon and you are the master of 2 worlds, the conscious and the unconscious. So the ultimate boon that I'm giving you and this activity is that 1-year clock model. So set a 1-year goal, and it's something where you're going to take your own hero's journey. You're going to take your own quest, to find the answer in achieving that. So for me, my 1-year goal is to have 4,000 people come together and participate in this service and education market economy. I hope that it moves faster than that, but I think that's very realistic, because as you go backwards in time from the 12 o'clock spot, I work with this 2x2 2 to the 20th power method. 4,000 divided by 2 is 2,000. So that will be accomplished by the 11th month. Then half of 2,000 is 1,000. Then half of that is 500, 250, 125. We'll round that down to 100 or so. 50, 25. So half of 25, 24 is 12, 6. And then we get back to the beginning of my clock, which is, let's just get 3 or 4 involved with this. And then they can pass it forward 2 by 2. So my month goal is to finish recording all of these classes that I'll be presenting on my website. My 2-month goal would be to edit them up and then actually have them available for you to listen to on my website. And then my 3rd month goal is to start to finalize shooting everything of my 2x2 documentary. This class itself is going to be a part of that documentary. And then we get into the 4th month, where I start to finalize editing the documentary film and letting other people see that. So that's all that I'm going to make the goal for, is for the next 3 to 4 months. I would encourage you to do the same, so that the next step will reveal itself. By the time I get to my 4th month, I'm in that desert phase. And then by the time we get to the 5th month, that's the plot twist. Things get turned upside down, and you're dealing with a little bit of chaos. You're dealing with a little bit of unpredictability. So that's why I really just encourage you to, plan it out maybe 3 to 4 months ahead of time. And then each step will reveal itself as you get back to the 12 o'clock spot in 1 year time. And I want you to share that with me. I would love to share and hear about your experiences, the 1-person presentation that you've created. So we are at 1 minute, and I did take off for about a minute or 2 to get my cat into the next room. But as we had stated at the beginning, this is where we start to recap, and there is a call to action at the end. So let's recap here. Number 1, the first point that we made is visualize the 1-hour clock model. And that's where you take your own content and you create your own presentation that you can share. And again, the goal is not to develop 1 million followers. Create this content for, just 1 or 2 people that you resonate with. And, that will get passed forward. I truly believe that. So the second point that we made is cultivate actionable intelligence. So to me, what actionable intelligence is, including people. Understanding that everybody has something, of value to give, and our job is to help guide each other towards that value and sharing it. Number 3 is the 3 techniques for engagement, and those 3 techniques are make your points, encourage interactivity, and tell vulnerable stories. Number 4 is understanding how to create functional relationships out of dysfunctional relationships, and that's where we created our matrix, our elemental matrix with fire, air, water, and earth, and the learning styles, and the control dramas, and the coaching competencies, and the techniques we use for all of those. And then the fifth thing we just covered just now was visualizing the 1-year clock model and how that ties into our own hero's journey. And that journey, just to recap, is a journey from unconscious competence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence and mastery. So great, we're done. So here's the call to action. What happens next? So what happens next is, obviously, I would love you to take this material and now start to develop your 1 year, your 1 hour and 1 year clock model. I'm available. You can email me at karmicmargincall@gmail.com. You can also try admin@karmicmargincall.com. So that's one step forward, to help us all come together and turn this thing around, kind of overthrow the hierarchy, so to speak. I don't know if we can overthrow the hierarchy, but we can definitely change the dynamic of the of everything. So that's the first thing, is develop your own one-person presentation. The second thing is that I will offer what's called service pages. So the service pages are basically a questionnaire that helps you to get clear on the services that you have to offer to humanity. It also helps you to get clear on what services you're looking for. And this is a document that gets paid forward 2 by 2, so that it gets out in front of, the theory is 1 million people within 20 months. So that you find, through the law of averages, through compounding effect and the law of averages, you find the right partners for you. And, we can encourage each other to create this service market economy. And then finally, the last thing is, please listen to the other presentations. The most meaningful conversation will help you have those conversations where you have more functional relationships. It helps to make dysfunctional relationships functional, and it helps to make already functional ones into, lifetime bonds. And then there's also the 21st Century Heroes Journey, where you take, some of your favorite stories, the characters and the stories that really resonate with you, and you can use it as an inspiration to understand your past so that you can create your own 1-hour presentation and then move forward into the future where we all create something together. All right. All right. We're at 1 hour and 5 minutes. So thank you again for joining me. My name is Mike Schumann. Again, I am the administrator of the Karmic Margin Call Project. So please, email me with your 1-hour presentation. Please check out the service pages and email that back to me, and check out some of the other audio, video content that I'll be offering here in the next few weeks. All right. Have a great night. Thank you for joining me.